Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you are new to the channel, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as we are constantly adding new streams to the channel. First, I would like to give a huge shout out to everyone that showed up to the Sublation launch event. Shout out to DJ Sal for offering up his services. Really appreciated that. That was awesome. Playing some great 90s hip-hop deep cuts. Toussaint is telling me to give his real name. I can't give his real name, Toussaint. It's fucked up. Can't do that. He has a DJ name. Just like I don't give out your real government name.
Yes, very good.
I took you off the screen because you made me so mad. Also, it was fun to hang out with Ben Burgess at one of the worst events I've ever been to, which was the Minds seminar debate thing in Manhattan. And in the bonus patron half, I will tell you about what happened there from the bird's eye view that we had, and the reception that Burgess got, actually surprisingly, from a lot of these people that we would call right-wingers or fans of the intellectual dark web. Me and Cuba having fun heckling people and trying to start a fight, because that's what I went to New York for. Stir up trouble. Speaking of good trouble, you guys missed him at the event, but he is feeling better, and he is definitely prepared for this evening. Please welcome my co-host, my homie, my dog, the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Pascal met so many people, and I do have to say, before we bring our guests in, the last night, the night of the event, me, Ben Burgess, Anders Lee, Hannah Feldman, Toussaint, and Andy Williams went walking around Brooklyn. And if my voice is it'll be a little choppy today, is because we spent most of the evening to the wee hours of the morning screaming from rats.
Screaming from rats.
Yes, rats. I was probably the worst of the screamers.
Probably. I can still hear you.
There was a few rats that were so big, the motherfuckers galloped through the streets. I swore I saw one rat break dance on a grate on the sidewalk. New York rats is no joke. Motherfuckers are strong and sassy. So that's all I gotta say about Brooklyn rats. Oh, Kuba was there with us too. I forgot to mention Kuba because he kind of shut it down a little earlier.
Kuba was representing the deep state on fleek.
Kuba bought a red tracksuit, but he wore the shirt and tie under the red tracksuit, and he had matching red. It was Adidas tracksuit, old school Adidas tracksuit, and he bought old school Adidas kicks, red Adidas kicks to go with the tracksuit, with the shirt and tie, and he tucked the shirt in to the tracksuit. Who was a goddamn fool.
There you go.
That was a lot of fun. Met a lot of people. We met Strom in real life, and he actually wore the Strom outfit. That Southern gentleman suit. Hung out with Doug Lane. Also, shout out to Norm Finkelstein, Doug Lane, crew. Who else am I leaving out, Tucson?
Ben Burgess.
Oh, Ben Burgess. Big shout out to Ben Burgess. Who else?
Oh, it's Sean KB.
Sean KB was there, Pascal.
Wow.
And like
Nancy Prada.
Jesus.
I
How's
think
Sean
Sean
KB?
lost weight or something because I didn't know who the fuck Sean was. He walked by me like 3 times and then finally like, that's Sean KB. I was like, oh damn, did he hit the gym? So
Yeah, I was surprised.
yeah, you were thinking the same thing.
He looks like Jesus, and he said he's a carpenter. What's going on here?
So yeah, it was a good time. I look forward to doing it again. Also, huge shout out to TJ and Project Parlor in Brooklyn for letting the whole event go down, helping make it happen. I didn't know what to expect when I got there. I was afraid it was going to be 4 people the whole night, and that place stayed packed. We had a good damn time, and let's do it again in October.
Right.
Don't have a date quite yet, and it might be somewhere different, but we are going to be back in October for an election night shindig party in New York, and I won't name the people that have agreed to show up just yet.
Okay.
Are you ready for that shindig, Toussaint?
I'm excited. Yeah.
And also another big shout out to Hannah Feldman for helping us with some of the logistics of the evening.
She was dope.
I had such a good time, and again, thank you guys so much. But that being said, let's bring in our guest. Our guest today, José Sanchez, is a doctoral student at the University of Duke, who wrote, and it's linked in the description of this show wherever you are watching it, and when you will soon be listening to it in the audio version, there is going to be a link in the description to his article, which is the title of this show, Against Afro Pessimism. I did make an intro clip for it if you guys saw it, where of course I put Spike Lee in it, or a Spike Lee movie in it, but I can't play the clip because of a copyright issue. Always something with YouTube. But please welcome, coming all the way live from Brooklyn, José Sanchez.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having me.
José, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you for joining us, Jose. Appreciate you coming on to talk about this very timely subject matter that is causing all types of intellectual consternation in Black and even non-Black spaces.
Yeah, no problem. It's been something that I've been wrestling with privately and in seminars for the last year or two. So, yeah, thank you so much.
So, Jason, would you like me to begin our questioning?
Yes, because everybody missed the sound of your melodious voice.
Oh, you were the one with the melodious. You were the one with the Colt 45 melodious voice.
If you can't dig the sound of my melodious voice.
Jose, to really give an introduction for our audience, can you define that which seems undefinable? What exactly is Afro Pessimism?
As any academic would say, it's complicated. It's a philosophy or perhaps a school of thought that is new, I guess, in sort of like a discrete contour or discrete form. Yet its sort of core tenets or its spirit, in a way, rests in a certain politics that has like a longer history than just the academic careers of, say, Frank Wilderson, who is the leading thinker or proponent of Afro Pessimism, or Jared Sexton, or even people who may not identify as Afro pessimists explicitly, but are seen to be part of, cut from the same cloth as Wilderson or Sexton, such as Sadia Hartman or Horton Spillers. It's a philosophy that's sort of rooted in this essentialization of blackness, that sort of rests on this like universalized black essence, this sort of essentialist black identity politics, that's kind of grounded in this like narrative of eternal essential abjection or oppression, degradation, and yeah, it sort of like cuts across. People have been saying, have been trying to apply an Afro-pessimist lens to geography, to prison studies, decarceration studies, to history, to literature, to critical theory, to literary theory, and it's growing. And yeah, I don't know. Did that make sense by any chance?
No, I understand. I mean, we've talked about it for quite a while. I've become familiar with it over the years through reading excerpts of Frank Wilderson's works. I read some of his essays, and I actually have read some of the books of him and his cohorts. And if you can correct me, the way I look at it, it's an expression of a belief in a kind of continual, perpetual, oppressive state of black identity rooted in this philosophy that blackness is oppressed almost like physics and earth science and water, in that it's natural to the air and that it will never change. And that it's basically almost kind of an eternal reality to like the biological essence of nature that black people are oppressed by quote unquote anti-blackness. Do you think that's a correct, or am I off in terms of how I would categorize its projection of itself?
Yeah, totally. That's totally correct. Yeah, it's sort of ironic how, sort of mirroring the terms of which racists, white supremacists, et cetera, of the past sort of couched their anti-black arguments, that discourse in like the language of like science, and measuring craniums and stuff like that, and how much blood you have in your body and stuff like that. It sort of flips that on its head, or like shifts into this like, yeah, this like metaphysical sort of register, or discursive grounding, and also like a psychoaffective sort of thing. They're really into Fanon, Frantz Fanon, or at
Mm-hmm.
least a bastardized version of Fanon, and a simplified version, a cannibalized version of Fanon.
I mean that. Okay, let me pause it right there for a second, and let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into this for just a bit. Um, a lot of these guys are quote unquote Fanon scholars. So how, and this is to Jose, you and Pascal. How do these scholars, so to speak, of Fanon get it so wrong then? If all they do is sit around and read and write about Fanon, are they just focused on the wrong aspect of Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Mask?
I think I'll be very honest with you is that as much as I find Fanon useful, and I do find aspects of his thought useful, I do also realize that there's this aspect of Fanon's analysis of race that can be applied to many of these same academics, in that most of black analysis of the quote unquote phenomenon of racial oppression is cohered to a petite bourgeois coterie of black people who are analyzing the reality of black life from the vantage of the particular way in which their class position interfaces with whiteness, but at the same time trying to vocalize the reality for classes of black people who do not represent what they are. And one of the consequences of that reality is that one of the phenomenon that comes to transpire is that the psychological effects of that quote unquote otherization becomes hyper-focused. Don't forget that Fanon is rooted in psychology as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is that the farther we get from a period of time in which race is the ultimate determining factor in the reality of Black people's lives, i.e. Jim Crow, the farther we get from which the period of time of Jim Crow, which created a universally defined barrier of Black existence, the farther we get from that, the more we get into the abstractions of how middle-class Negroes feel that they are psychologically affected by racism as the definition of what most Black people should define as what oppression is. Jose, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Jose.
Yeah, I'm not exactly a Fanon scholar. Yeah, it seems like they don't even, at least when it comes to Wilderson and other Afro-pessimist thinkers, and then folks who identify as Afro-pessimists that I've engaged with in person or online, don't even really engage with the later, oeuvre of Fanon, like The Wretched of the Earth and works that come out of his time, I believe, during and after the Algerian Revolution, right? A lot of it is centered on white, what is it, black skin, white masks?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was the opposite, but which is like an earlier piece, and there's a part in it, and I believe I quoted it in the Jacobin essay where he says that the sort of that interiority, that sort of psychoaffective, that mental, almost distillation of what's happening to Black folks on a systematic level. I'm paraphrasing, but he says it's first and foremost material and economic, and then there's a sort of feedback loop into the mind, into affects, into the psyche, that that he's trying to like tease out and work through. Yet, I don't know. There's this something came to my mind. I was reading Jameson the other day, The Political Unconscious, and he was talking about how psychoanalysis itself, Freud, for instance, sort of comes out or comes during this moment in which capitalism is just sort of rationalizing society on so many different levels, and sort of compartmentalizing everything, people's sense of self. And so out of that comes psychoanalysis, which is sort of like a hyper compartmentalization of one's own mind as distinct from the wider society around a person, right? So if you sort of like Wilderson, just like base a whole theory or just like on sort of like inculcate psychoanalysis and don't really problematize it and like see it as like part of like a social totality or historical totality, and it's all about like what's in your head. I'm sorry, am I rambling?
No. I feel like a lot of Wilderson that I've seen, I haven't read a lot of him. I read a few articles.
Yeah.
A lot of it's anecdotal.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a work of autocrism, he calls it.
Yeah. He uses these anecdotes as proof, and they almost seem overly dramatically silly in a way to prove his point, i.e. he's his wife's slave, his wife is a white woman, comments he made about his first Black wife. It just seems dramatic for dramatic's sake.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Pascal?
No, well, first of all, I think that it's literary escapism that he's trying to rationalize into a politics for the sake of actually getting a market niche. Bottom line is that he comes out of English. He's not a political philosopher, and he is creating a period piece of thought of Black social reality that comes at a particular time in history when, one, we know that the rise of this kind of postmodern academic theorization is in colleges and universities that tries to divorce material analysis from higher education, and at the same time we have Black elites who are hyper paranoid about where the positionality is going to be in the 21st century with the rise of Obama and the diminishing returns on the racial democratic kind of affirmative action type policies that have lifted so many of them into the middle class evaporating. I see Frank Wilderson, Afro Pessimism, and much of this post civil rights black thought as a direct demonstration of the psychoses of black elites who are unwilling to find another way to validate their ability to leverage racial grievance as a means of brokering for their class, causing internal psychoses amongst themselves that comes about in these things that manifest as ineffective politics. And I think that Afro pessimism is a perfect example of that because there's no politics in Afro pessimism.
Well, is it the gift that keeps on giving then? Is it just a constant racial grievance, almost like racial grievance porn?
Well, what it is that it creates, well, don't forget, is that this creates a legitimization for those who adhere themselves to this school of thought because they have an authority. They have an authority to get foundation funding. They have an authority to get tenure at university. They have the authority to get white liberal largesse to bankroll them to seem authentically experts on the condition of black life, which is nothing but a replication of what their own psychoses about dealing with their middle class positions are, dealing with America in a time in which their ability to be ventriloquists for masses of black people that they don't really actually suffer in terms of the same realities is becoming more and more difficult because their utility as racial brokers is up for grabs because the mechanisms that have created them are becoming more difficult. Affirmative action is only going to be lasting so much longer. So what's going to be happening is that they need to find a way to legitimize themselves. So since the traditional pleas for racial democracy have not worked, well, it's just the ultimate fatalistic is this Afro pessimism. There'll never be justice in these white folks' lands, so we've got to either get reparations or we got to find a way for us to just get some kind of foundation compensation.
Well, doesn't it also say that racism is eternal? White racism, white oppression is eternal. And it is that white oppression, and it is anti-black violence that is the most violent of all violence, and like everything is anti-black violence. Actually, can you explain a little bit of that, Jose? Because that whole anti-black violence thing, I really don't like to categorize violence. I've never been a fan of it. I've never felt like one felt better than the other. Can you talk about the whole anti-black violence and anti-black, just that whole usage of that phrasing in this, what would you call this, theory?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I think Reed once called this sort of idea like a devil theory of race. Because it's just like race, anti-blackness is all-encompassing. It's sort of, white people, non-blacks, and they have like a particular ire for people of color who are not black, like Palestinians, indigenous people, and parts of Willison's memoir just like harps on the sort of like so ingrained as to be like unmovable anti-blackness of this Chinese American doctor, I believe Dr. Zhao, and then these American Indians who confronting his dad, who was like a high-ranking official at the University of Minnesota, I believe. But yeah, it's just like, race, blackness is, there's no explanation for it. It's not grounded in any sort of like historical or material analysis. There's no mention of class. And Gloria Wecker, who's this Afro-Surinamese Dutch professor, noted this. There's this like, and he says it in the introduction, or rather the first chapter of his memoir, but and other people say it too, that anti-blackness is worse than, say, sexism, it's worse than homophobia, it's worse than capitalism, and that it cannot be analogized to those systems of oppression. And so it's and of course, a straight, cisgender, black, like rich man is saying these things, because if he was like a black woman like Angela Davis who disagrees with Afro pessimism, he probably wouldn't, he would probably say like sexism is just as bad as racism or anti-blackness. Or if he was like gay like myself, he would say that homophobia or transphobia is just as bad and impacts the lives of Black folks just as much as racism. And if he's had to, you know, GoFundMe his rent before, like I have in Brooklyn, this expensive ass city that I love, he would say that capitalism obviously impacts the lives of Black folks, and it's just like not, it's just like lost on him and other people. And you know, people would say or give like a sort of they'll hint and wink at any sort of, for lack of a better term, intersectional analysis. Christina Chart does that. She talks about like the poverty that her family faced in the wake, but it just goes back to this like unexplainable, this like phantom anti-blackness that is all around us, you cannot get rid of, that has no beginning and thus it has no ending. You can't get rid of it. So there's no sort of politics to it. Yeah, if you can't, like, how can you change something that's always been there? It's like fighting against the sky or something, or against the moon, you know, or against Satan himself, you know. You can't really have a politics if you have that sort of like metaphysical Black essentialism in your head. Am I making any sense? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's that's why one of my biggest problems with this project is that it's completely it's apolitical and ahistorical, in that it posits this notion that somehow there's this kind of earth science like history between blacks and non-blacks that makes anti-blacks this kind of like physics phenomenon, when there's a direct material history over conflict in time, shifting empires, rising civilizations, conflicts in geostrategic spaces, that explains why people of African descended nations have been used for material purposes to extract labor. This is not exactly a phenomenon that does not have a material history behind it. But yet Afro pessimism completely ignores that and makes it seem like, no, it's always some kind of ontological way in which, and it's just a mystery that we must adhere to. And there will
Yeah.
be nothing that will ever remedy it until we come to this great ending. Like, there has to be some kind of like, so when's, I mean, my question whenever I hear these fools talk this nonsense, so when are you picking up the spear or the shotgun for the race war?
He doesn't have to. He's a tenured professor at what is it, Irvine, University of California. So just like, he's cool. I mean, he's comfortable, right? Like there's no sort of, he doesn't have to you know, I don't want to reduce people's ideologies to their status, right? I think things are more complicated than that, but I think, you know, interests do exist, and that's connected to the way that we conceive of things. He doesn't really have to do that. He doesn't have to hit the streets. And it seems like every time that there is like a hitting the street moment, like that essay of his from, I believe, last year or 2 years ago, during the uprising, in which he said that it seemed like every sort of, he was like, we can't depend on our white allies, we can't depend on the state, we can't depend on this or that. It just seemed to be so fatalistic. Because it's Afro pessimism, right? If you can't get rid of racism, then like there's no other option but to be fatalistic. And so yeah, that lends to sort of political quiescence. Is that how you pronounce them? Quiescence. But also because, and I argue this, because at the core there's like this essentialist sort of conception of race. I think that lends itself perfectly, sort of like, is intimately connected to the Black nationalist politics, Black separatist politics of the past. And you know, I say that and I connect that to conceptions of Jewishness and anti-Semitism, and of course we, you know, don't really have an example of like you know, the Black Belt thesis. That whole thing with the Communist Party didn't go well, but I used the example of Liberia and connect that to Israel to sort of show just how made up, partly what like a lethal fiction blackness is, and what this sort of racial essentialism could possibly lead us to. I'm not too sure we'll get to that. I don't think I don't think the Liberian project is going to be revived anytime soon, but in a lot of these democratic cities, blue cities like New York, right? Like you have these black politicians like Eric Adams, sort of like deflect criticism, legitimate criticisms of them by saying that, oh, I'm just like an oppressed black person. Of course, you would say that, and that's anti-black. You saw a lot of that when people would confront Obama from the left. People would be like, oh, you're just anti-black. And the pushback against my article, I mean, that was like all over the place that I'm anti-black, even though I'm black, or that I'm like a my favorite was like a white man's whore. That's what a lot of people called me. And so
They
of course
called you a white man's whore?
a white man's whore.
With times? I do want to ask you about this. Let's get real for a second.
Sure.
As I knew, like I said earlier before we even got on air, there were going to be some people in the chat that are going to feel very, very passionate about what we're talking about, mainly because it really F's up their whole notion about being king victim. You wrote your article in Jacobin, which is a large publication. And, Jacobin has levels, right? Some of the bigger writers are in the paywall stuff. And then, newer writers like yourself are going to be in some of the free part of the magazine. That being said, I do not like everything I read in Jacobin, and we've definitely had shows on here where we talk about some things we don't like there. That doesn't mean that we, disagree with all the people that we know that work there. Do you feel that had that article have been in like a Black Agenda report, maybe would have been treated a little differently?
Probably. To be honest, yeah, to be transparent, and friendly with, no, personally, a lot of people on the masthead. And I live in Brooklyn. I'm in the central Brooklyn branch of the Democratic Socialists of America. I was on the organizing committee before, and organized other things. So I'm close to them in a way, but in a way that I am not to say the Black Agenda report. So yeah, it probably would have been received differently if it didn't have, reputation of being like, I don't know, like
DSA.
Yeah, milquetoast left, almost liberal, etc. But I don't really.
But the irony is, where does Wilderson write?
Yeah, exactly.
Wilderson's not writing in Black Agenda report.
He's writing in the Nation
or something. Yeah,
that's the thing. The guy these people love, that they champion, who knows nothing about and cares not. He teaches at UC Irvine. You think people that look like Frank Wilderson go to Irvine and ain't dribbling a ball?
Yeah.
Seriously. So, he's not teaching at Compton Community College.
Yeah. Or CUNY, where I actually went to for union semester.
But he loves telling you about how every time he's around a white person, they got to say something about you're okay, but not all the way okay. I can't stand it. And for people to be like, well, this cat wrote this article in Jacobin, it's like, well, where's Frank Wilderson writing?
Yeah.
Like,
and
seriously.
His wife is white. He has a white wife.
He has a white wife.
That's his, and he calls himself her slave. Like, I've been with white guys. Yeah. I've been with white guys. I'm not into that sort of slave play, race play stuff. So that's not me. So call me white man's whore however much you want, but I'm not that.
How did you feel though when someone has the audacity to call you the white man's whore when their hero calls himself the white man's slave? How is this any sort of ideology of upliftment? how does this? What is the end goal in your? Mike V says the sunken place. What is the end goal of Afro pessimism in your guys' opinion, Pascal and
Yo, fatback and biscuits with tenure and foundation money. That's all the end goal is. That's all the end goal could be. This is this is the same liberal. This is nothing but hashtag politics with tenure. All right, it's the same bullshit that we see over and over again with overeducated Negroes who are basically pissed off that they have to deal with white folk who ask them questions like, "Wow, what do you use to perm your hair?" And microaggressions turn into the racial hostility of the day. So they end up coming up with these crap theories that have nothing to do with the fact that black people need jobs that can help them pay their bills to justify the mediocre lives as racial ventriloquists for the majority of black folk who they don't even interface with. It's a con game. And it demonstrates how much the crap that has been black political and social thought in the post-civil rights era is coming to a position where it's so useless that now all it does is complain about the complaints.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I sort of, I don't know, maybe this is weird, but I sort of, and the memoir is beautifully written and is evocative in certain ways.
he
I'll
comes
get,
out of literature?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great memoir in a certain way, but like, and I saw myself in him in that, I was mostly raised, out in Jersey, in a predominantly white suburb. And yeah, I experience all sorts of bullshit, right, from white people and from others. I probably participated in some bullshit. I'm human, sadly, tragically. Um, but like, I think, but I'm also like going to Duke, like like I'm doing okay, and I think that for as much racial animus exists and like all these stereotypes, these microaggressions exist for maybe kids that were, born and raised in like, not born, but like raised in like these white suburbs, these middle class areas. Um, we're still doing better than like our skin folks, so to speak, in let's say housing project in Newark, where I was, born and raised for the first couple years of my life, or in here in Brooklyn, like right, like a couple blocks from me, right, a block or two from me, like these housing projects, like, and we're in these like Ivy League universities, and we end up getting these like tenure track jobs. Like that's not comparable to the poverty that so many Black folks, so many Latinos, Afro Latinos like myself experience, Afro Puerto Ricans here and across the hemisphere. And so I feel like maybe he just needed to like get some therapy or something and just like work through all the stuff that happened to him, because he ended up being fine. And like the microaggressions suck, but they're not. You can't compare them to the macroaggressions of like racial capitalism, of like institutionalized patriarchy, etc. And yeah, there just seems to be this like harping on what had happened, like the touching of the hair would have in these like professional spaces. And I think yeah, it comes back to this like anxiety, like like in the wider culture, I'm supposed to be oppressed and everything, but I made it. So am I actually oppressed? Who am I? But if blackness is eternal degradation, but I'm a tenured professor, or I am the president of the United States, or I'm the mayor of the wealthiest metropolitan.
Won't they tell you though? Because someone might call you the N word, ergo that is your oppression.
Right. Which is like nobody should call anybody the N-word, but that's not oppression in the bigger historical macro sense. Yeah. So it's just like I don't know. Sorry, it's my roommate's dog. I don't know where it comes from. I guess this I don't know, this anxiety, I guess, this like middle class petite bourgeois anxiety, this anxiety of the intelligentsia, integrated yet and comfortable, yet still marked by the color of their skin in a way.
I I don't think it's accidental that the main arbiter of this school of thought in the millennium during the age of Obama is Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was primarily frontlined to be a cheerleader of the Obama project. Yet when the Obama project is deemed to be a failure for black voters with the rise of Trayvon Martin and a variety of other factors, all of a sudden he reverts to Afro pessimism like, well, if we can't have our first Wall Street manufactured black president be accepted and save us, then everything is damned. So it's not accidental to me that the phenomenon that triggered the whole all of these articles about, like, the case for reparations, and oh, my president is black, all of these other of the horrors of black life come about because you read Coach. The first series of articles are all celebrating the black president. My
Hmm.
president is black. We got
We're
the
8 years in power.
and then all of a sudden, when things are falling apart, when the material consequences of the black president are not demonstrating actual joyous responses for black folk, and we started to see things like Black Lives Matter, Trayvon Martin, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, the case for reparations, as Bruce Dixon always told me, that whenever there's a crisis of racial legitimacy, when the actor in question will always pump up his fist and his dashiki. He says, "We need reparations now," to legitimize himself. And what ends up happening is that in the wake of the failure of the Obama project, which the project in itself is supposed to be the aspiration of black politics. In other words, the best you're supposed to get from the Obama project is Obama himself, which was a
Hmm.
transparent failure from the beginning in terms of what it was set up to be. In the wake of the failure of that project, we now have this ridiculous cartoonish politics that has dominated black thought, that was ventriloquized, particularly through Coates, with Afro pessimism, with reparations, and the quote unquote black agenda that has now subsumed all of black politics, which is born out of buying into a lie in the first place that this Wall Street manufactured con man is going to somehow uplift the race. And people wonder why I don't take these clowns seriously, because I know where their bullshit project starts and where it comes from.
Well, this is another thing that I love, and I'm sure you got this, Jose. Did people tell you that you didn't understand what Afro pessimism was, and you were missing something?
Oh yeah, all the time.
But they
People
never
were,
told you what you didn't understand, right?
yeah, or like pointed out like, and I was like posting screenshots of like PDFs of, Hartman, Sadia, Hartman, Wilderson, etc. And people were just like, oh, you didn't get it, or you didn't read this, that, and the other. And like, sure, I didn't read everything that they've written. I didn't annotate everything that they've written, but like, what exactly is wrong with what I'm saying from that comes out of what I've read so far? And like, why am I inaccurate? So they just like never really. It's just like, I think you called it the gift that keeps on giving. There's just like something. I mean, if race, if anti-blackness is all in our heads, right, and it's like invisible yet ever present, if it's just like phantasmagoric in a way, then anybody that opposes this line of thought has to be a white man's whore, right? They have to like psychoeffectively be sort of like invested in anti-blackness, if anti-blackness is sort of outside of history. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, you talked a lot about Liberia in your article, and again, I love when people talk about how Afro pessimism is such a good tool, much like intersectionality is some sort of like good tool to use for people to understand discrimination, not even discrimination, racism.
Hmm.
I don't think people really understand from an academic standpoint, like the people that write these books, that's where
Mm.
money is. People that make these films. There's a reason why Ava DuVernay is going to make films on the horrors of black life, right? People loved 13. That was horrible. It's extremely inaccurate. People love When They See Us. Loved it. She's going to make more of that. And you know who loves it? Who do you think loves it? Who do you think's paying all that money to see all these movies?
Rich white people.
That's where the money is. Am I lying, Pascal?
No, not at all. Not at all, man.
Sandy Darity got how many hundreds of thousands of dollars just to read about reparations? It didn't come from the Bill Cosby Fund. It didn't come from Oprah's wallet.
It's amazing. You know what's funny is that people are talking about, like, y'all don't want to talk. We talk about racism all the time. It's like, y'all don't want to talk about racism because y'all want to get in line with white liberal. I was like, yo, listen, the Negroes who are talking about racism are the ones getting the biggest fatback and biscuits in the world. Talking about the white man gets you paid all the time. What are you talking about?
Coleman Hughes will never see
have
as much money as Ibrahim X. Kendi. Never. On his best dressed Sunday. He doesn't have that racial grievance porn that Kendi has.
The bottom line is that talking about that stuff doesn't challenge anything because it's not rooted in challenging capitalism. All it is saying is that, listen, you just give us a little equity in terms of our representation in the already existing capitalist pie, and you give us a little set-aside money in some other racial democracy, and we'll be okay. We'll just keep this shuffling going over and over again. But the actual distribution of resources that maintains that you have a disproportionate number of black people ground to powder and dust in the reserve army of labor doesn't get challenged.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I have to agree.
Because Wilson will tell you that capitalism is not relative to race or racism. He actually wrote that in the Nation article. I was like, what, do you think that the white people brought you over here in slave ships because they didn't like your curly afros?
Afro Pessimism is a post-Marxist ideology. Hate to break it to you guys. I don't know how many people here actually read Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism. I know a lot of people have it on the bookshelf.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, his whole thing was that the sort of oppression that black folks would face in the era of Atlantic slavery was sort of prefigured by the oppression of, say, Jews or Slavs or European, like, quote unquote, white peasants, the Irish, especially back in Europe, and that they, parallel each other. One was the model for the other. And I mean, I guess people, when it comes to Robinson, sort of, and I guess my problem with Robinson is that he has this, like, sort of, he too has this sort of racial essentialism, and saying that, Africanity or Africanisms are, like, inherently politically radical and lend themselves to that. I think that's, like, an issue that I have with Robinson, but everything else is kosher as far as I'm concerned. And then, yeah, there's this, and I mentioned this in the piece, we live in this moment in the defeat, out of the wake of, the 70s and the defeat of labor, this world historic defeat of labor, and the onset of what's become neoliberalism, right? And, the Reagan counter-revolution, the Thatcherite revolution, paralleling that and intimately connected to it. And people like David Harvey and Frederick Jameson have written about this, just sort of like historicizing this intellectual turn. We have, like, the cultural turn or the linguistic turn. And so I'm reducing so much of the literature that I've read so far, but, like, it's all about culture, it's all about language, it's all about discourse, and that's sort of divorced from, like, the wider social historical totality. the economy, the material, systems of gender, of sexuality, all that stuff. And so, yeah, if you like look at discourse alone, sure, there's anti-blackness within discursive regimes or epistemes, as Foucault and Foucauldians would call it. But like that sort of these discourses are embedded within, again, like a wider totality that involves the material, involves political economy. And so if you just like look at the writings, the anti-black writings of various intellectuals and journalists and politicians alone, like divorced from like what their words are masking or mystifying, and what interests are they serving, and what work that race does as like a tool, um, then you're just like missing so much. And so, I mean, that's the problem with post-structuralism. We're talking like folks like Derrida, Jacques Derrida.
Mm-hmm.
His whole like deconstruction methodology, or I guess you can call it that, or a concept. People like Gabriel Spiegel has criticized, and I'm coming out of this from like historical discipline. Gabriel Spiegel has written, criticized the historical turn in the cultural linguistic turn in history. And then William Sewell, in Logics of History, has written about this intellectual trend as well. And again, David Harvey and Frederick Jameson have like given it like a wider sort of like historical context, this discursive or intellectual or academic trend that I see Afro Pessimism as like a symptom of, because it's all about, again, like the psyche, affect, discourse, divorced from class, from political economy, and from history, really. Sorry, am I rambling? Did you have a question? I feel like I just
Well,
get
no,
into
I think the
yeah.
postmodernism. I think the postmodernism point is kind of a big one. We've definitely done shows about postmodernism, and Afro Pessimism get the same kind of negative response all the time we do the shows. It's always like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not talking about real postmodernism. And what did Jean Baudrillard say about it? Postmodernism? He goes, it's anything and everything all at once.
I mean, to me, man, it's just all of this is just a direct product of the fact that people are willing to pay folk to talk about not solving the problem. That you can make money talking about not solving the problem. If you don't want to talk about the way in which capitalism requires that people are ground to powder in this country and challenge capitalism directly, then of course you're going to get people like David Brooks who are going to say, yeah, we should really look at Afro pessimism. I mean, what does it tell you that a conservative in the New York Times like David Brooks is literally touting Frank Willison's book on Afro pessimism and talking about people should read this? The reason he's doing that because Brooks is telling you this is not going. He knows this is not going to challenge anything. The same reason David Brooks will tell you, like, yeah, maybe we should look into reparations, because he also realizes that's not going to challenge anything. Because David Brooks's ultimate goal is to make sure he's protecting the hierarchy of capitalism and how it works for people of his class.
Yeah, if you have like a couple of black faces in the room, in the boardroom, then that doesn't, like, we're supposed to be burning down the boardroom, right? Like, yeah, totally. I think I've always thought that was pretty suspect. His Brooks's celebration of Wilson and others like him, and like the touting of from like other like white conservatives and liberals in these like elite spaces. Yeah, totally.
Well, did you want to ask the final question, Pascal, as we're coming up on the hour?
I mean, my ultimate question is that what exactly does it say about this particular moment in American political thought, particularly race in American political thought, that something like Afro pessimism is capturing such a large segment of a generation of black activists or political thinkers?
I think it's something bleak. It's something disappointing. I have encountered otherwise extraordinary and admirable people in the academy, in organizing spaces, movement spaces, and otherwise like brilliant thinkers and writers online and elsewhere, sort of like get into this like worldview and espouse these politics. And it just always struck me as like kind of contradictory, right? Because again, if race has no history, if blackness has no beginning or anti-blackness has no beginning, then it doesn't have an end, so you can't get rid of it. So why are you, like why this? Why these writings? Why this line of thinking, of reasoning? If you can call it reasoning, or maybe reading from like a catechism or something. Um, with all due respect to people of faith, but I guess things are pretty fucking bleak. I mean, there's a lot of reason to be pessimistic. Are people still catching hell?
Hmm?
And more than us, everybody is. It's hell is hot wherever you are, and I mean, the world just seems to be getting worse and worse. The oceans will swallow up our cities, and you know, the earth would be scarred by wet bulb events and heat waves and nuclear weapons. I mean, there's so much to be pessimistic about. There's a lot to sort of attribute to some sort of like primordial evil. There's like evil all around us. I understand that, but we have to, we can't give up. You gotta keep the faith always, no matter how hot hell gets. And I think, um, And I think, going back to what I said earlier, there's this like cultural or linguistic turn in the academy, and that comes out of like I said, the defeat of the labor movement, and that's connected again to this like wider pessimism, I guess. But I think there's a pushback. I think the trends in the academy are changing. People love Adolf Reed. I think people are getting back into him. I think he's been proven right in a lot of ways, by Obama and by like the black political class and their media acolytes, sycophants, shall we say, in the mass media and academia. I think a lot of people who were just like energized by the uprising, and with that uprising, I mean, I was getting chased by cops with in New York here with like white friends and friends who were not black, and we were all catching hell. And I think that moment sort of like prefigured what we needed, which is like this multiracial coalition of working class people to overthrow once and for all the bourgeoisie, and capitalism. But of course, we're going to have these comfortable middle class Negroes and otherwise, who are saying that nothing can change, that nothing has ever changed, but we got to keep fighting. There's the only alternative is just like death, and we can't have that. We have to keep fighting. So um, I hope people, have read my article. I hope they like it, and I hope they keep reading. And yeah, I think it's a bleak moment. I understand why people are turning to this. Yeah. Am I
I,
making that?
I
Did I
agree.
answer your question?
No, I agree, and I think we said this. We had a call earlier, a pre-show call, and I told you I feel like we are in a moment right now where people feel defeated. There was a movement that comes out of Sanders and then actually Trump, where people were thinking collectively, but there was a lot of hero worship put into the potential of elected figures saving people, and
Mm,
not people saving people. And their idea of socialism was we're going to elect the right socialists. And when those
mm,
people lost, I feel a collective feeling of defeat, and now we just regress into racial grievance politics, because you can always win the moral fight.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the small shit, and yeah, I went down with comrades in the DSA March 2020 to Charleston, and then I went up to Boston to campaign for Bernie. I voted for him in 2016, campaigned for him, and everything that follows, crushing, absolutely crushing. The uprising gave me hope. I haven't felt that much hope in so long. I haven't felt that way about the world since until Friday, I guess, when the city sort of rose up against the Supreme Court's decision. I haven't been in a protest like that um, since the uprising up until Friday. I think we just have to, the sort of unraveling of the uprising and how it was just like channeled into. I mean, to have Eric Adams win in this city, that just like went into fucking flames, really, went up into fucking flames. Um, that was crushing. Again, I understand the pessimism, but earlier I was just canvassing for one of our candidates running for state assembly, um, Sammy Namir Olivares, another queer person of color like myself, a comrade. We have other races throughout the city. I think the left in the city is turning our attention to like those small, and impactful sort of victories or what have you. And I hope people's attention can turn to that until the next presidential cycle. But at the same time, fuck presidents. I think we need to divert our attention to like more like rooted or things in our own backyards more often than not. And then we can talk about the White House. But we have to have that strong sort of foundation, our communities or workplaces, the Starbucks stuff. I mean, oh my goodness, the Amazon win over in Staten Island. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, am I taking up time? My apologies.
No. I mean, you're the one that's got somewhere to be, not us. So.
Oh, yeah. I got to go to the election. The election. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jose. Thank you so much for coming on. Please writing. There were some good comments people left you as well on Twitter, and just
cool.
the people that you wanted to like, that you were trying to reach. you're reaching them, and some people that inspired you, read your work, and appreciate it. So
thank you so much, y'all. Yeah, much love and respect to all of you. Solidarity.
That is Jose Sanchez. Check out his article in Jacobin. There is a link in the description. We will be going to the bonus call-in champagne room. So if you are a patron, the link is up. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. If you want to get in on the action, I can tell you guys about picking fights with right-wingers in New York and hanging out with MT and walking all over Brooklyn with Ben Burgess and Cuba. Who else was with us?
And rats.
And too many goddamn rats. God damn it.
Well, they wanted to welcome you to New York.
I swear I saw one breakdance in front of that bodega. It's a liquor store with a flat top. That's what it is.
Wow.
Bodega. It's a liquor store with a deep fryer.
It's gentrified, so there's healthy options.
Well, we will get into that also. And you ate all my fries. You and Andy ate all my fries.
Ben, too. I'm snitching. Ben, too. He has bigger hands than me.
Well, thank you guys. We enjoyed the conversation. We definitely enjoy even a little bit of the pushback. It keeps us on our toes. If you disagree, leave a comment and explain why you disagree. And on that note, we are
Out.
Out.